Here is your cinematic bedtime story, softly narrated just for you. A 1509-year-old immortal wolf guarded a secret kingdom until one boy arrived. There is a place in this world that does not appear on any map, not because no one thought to draw it, but because every hand that tried found the ink refused to settle. The lines would blur, the paper would absorb the marks as though embarrassed by them, and the cartographer would wake the next morning with no memory of ever having tried. The place protected itself, the way certain deep things do, not with walls or weapons, but with a kind of gentle forgetting that settled over those who came too close. This place was called Varenhal. It lay beyond the silver birch forests of a country whose name has since been lost, nested between two mountains that leaned against each other like old friends who had grown tired of standing alone. The valley between them was wide and green and filled with a soft golden light that seemed to come not from the sun, but from somewhere inside the earth itself, as though the ground remembered a warmth it once held and had never quite let go. There were buildings in Varenhal, not ruins but whole, standing, patient things. Stone towers with vines that bloomed in every season. Market squares where the cobblestones still held the worn-in shapes of 1,000 years of footsteps. Libraries whose shelves were full, whose candles never quite burned out. A city complete in every detail except for one, the people. Varenhal had no people, not anymore, but it was not empty. At the northern edge of the valley, where the two mountains met and a narrow pass opened onto a ridge of black rock, there lived a wolf. He was enormous, not in the way of creatures that frighten, but in the way of very old things that have grown into themselves slowly, year by year, century by century, until they have become something almost beyond description. His coat was the color of winter moonlight, white with faint threads of silver running through it like rivers on an aged map. His eyes were amber, the deep and particular amber of honey held up to a candle, and within them, if you looked carefully and were not afraid, you could see something that had no name, a kind of depth, like looking into very still water and seeing not a reflection but a distance. His name was Marin. He had been given that name by someone who loved him very much, and that someone had been gone for 800 years. Marin had been alive for 1,509 years. He did not find this remarkable. He had stopped finding most things remarkable around the 300th year. What he found instead was quiet. He had settled into the long, slow rhythm of a life that stretched on the way a river stretches. Never still, never hurried, simply moving, always moving towards some distant place he had not yet reached. He walked the streets of Varenhal each morning, his great paws almost soundless on the cobblestones. He sat in the libraries in the afternoons, turning pages with a patience that bordered on ceremony. He watched the stars each night from the ridge, and sometimes he spoke to them, very softly, in a language that had not been spoken by any living being in 4 centuries. He guarded the kingdom not out of duty, exactly. Duty implies obligation, and Marin felt no obligation to anyone who still breathed. He guarded it the way a person guards a memory, not because they have to, but because releasing it would mean letting go of something too precious, too irreplaceable, too connected to who they were before everything changed. Varenhal had been a living kingdom once, full of laughter and argument and the smell of bread and the sound of children running on those cobblestones in the blue evening light. Marin had known those children. He had known their parents and grandparents and great-grandparents. He had watched 11 generations grow from infancy to old age, had felt the particular quiet that follows a life well lived, multiplied by the hundreds. He had watched Varenhal fill and empty and fill again, had watched its politics and its harvests and its small ordinary dramas, and then, one spring morning 1,500 years ago, give or take a decade, something had happened to the kingdom that Marin still did not fully understand. They had all gone to sleep, every single person, on the same night, in whatever position they happened to be in, sitting at dinner, standing in doorways, lying in their beds. They had simply closed their eyes, and they had not opened them again. Not in death, in something else. Something like sleep, but slower, deeper, as still as stone and yet somehow warm. Marin had been the only one who hadn't gone under. Perhaps because he was something other than human, or perhaps because whatever force had reached into Varenhal that night had known it needed him to stay. He had checked every face, every chest, breathing, barely, but there. He had wrapped them in blankets and moved those who were in uncomfortable positions and kept the fires going through the first winter. He had grown slowly to understand that they were not sick, not dying, not simply resting. They were waiting. For what, he did not know. He had spent 15 centuries learning not to ask the question too often. Some mornings it rose in him anyway, a low ache like an old wound in cold weather. On those mornings he would walk to the very center of the city, to the great circular plaza where the fountain still ran, fed by some underground spring that knew no season, and he would sit beside it and listen to the water, and eventually the ache would subside. He had learned that some questions were not meant to be answered quickly. Some answers required the full weight of time to arrive. The boy's name was Elias. He was 11 years old, and he was lost. He had not meant to find Varenhall. He had not meant to venture so deeply into the birch forest beyond the village where his grandmother lived. He had been following a bird, a strange one, pale and translucent at the edges of its wings, the kind of bird that doesn't appear in any book of birds because it doesn't quite belong to the world of ordinary daylight. He had followed it for what felt like an hour but might have been longer, moving through the silver-white trees with his hands occasionally reaching out to touch the bark, just to feel something solid. And then the trees had thinned, and the light had changed, gone from the cool gray of an overcast morning to that deep, sourceless gold. And he had stepped out of the forest onto a hillside and looked down into Varenhall. His first feeling was not fear. It was the particular feeling of recognizing something you have never seen before, which is one of the stranger experiences available to human beings and one of the rarest. He stood there for a long time, looking down at the towers and the empty streets and the fountain catching the gold light in its spray, and he felt, though he would not have been able to say why, that he had been here before. Not in this life. Perhaps in a story he had heard and forgotten. Perhaps in a dream that had left only its feeling behind. He went down into the valley. He found the sleeping people first. A woman in a doorway with her chin resting on her hand, as though she had simply paused to think, and the thinking had taken her somewhere very far away. 2 children on a bench in the market square, their heads together, sharing a dream that had lasted 1,000 years. An old man in the library, a book still open in his lap, his finger pressed lightly against a page as though he had just been about to say something important. Elias moved through the city quietly, the way you move through a place you understand to be sacred, and he did not touch anyone, and he did not feel afraid. He found the wolf at the fountain. Marin had known the boy was there before he reached the plaza, had known it from the moment Elias entered the valley, had felt the change in the air the way you feel the first slight shift that means a long season is about to turn. He sat very still and waited, and when Elias came around the corner and stopped, seeing him for the first time, Marin did not move. He looked at the boy with those amber eyes, and the boy looked back, and for a long moment neither of them did anything at all. Then Elias said very quietly, "Are you the one who looks after them?" Marin considered this. He had not spoken aloud in many years. The words came back to him slowly, like items retrieved from a very deep drawer. "Yes," he said. His voice was low and soft, like the sound of wind moving through tall grass. Elias sat down on the edge of the fountain. He seemed somehow not surprised that the wolf could speak. He seemed somehow not surprised by anything about this place. "How long?" he asked. "A very long time," Marin said. "Longer than you could easily imagine." "Are they going to wake up?" Marin looked at the boy carefully. He had asked himself this question more times than he could count. He had heard it in his own voice, in the voice of the woman who had named him, in the voices of all the people he had known who were now sleeping or gone, and he had always not known the answer. But now, sitting beside this specific boy on this specific morning, he felt something shift in him, a movement as quiet and certain as a key turning in a lock after 15 centuries. "I think," he said slowly, "that they were waiting for you." Elias looked at him. He had the kind of face that felt things fully without immediately knowing what to do with them, an honest face, a careful face. "Why me?" he said. Marin did not answer right away. He walked to the center of the plaza and sat, and Elias followed and sat beside him, close enough that the warmth of the wolf's great body was like sitting beside a hearth. And Marin told him, then, Everything. The kingdom as it had been. The morning of the sleeping. The 15 centuries of patient waiting. He told it the way someone tells a story they have held inside for a very long time, and there was a slowness to it, a deliberateness, like someone setting down heavy things one by one. Elias listened without interrupting. The golden light held steady around them. The fountain ran its quiet course. When Marin finished, Elias was quiet for a moment. Then he reached into the pocket of his jacket and drew out a small stone, an ordinary thing, grayish-white, smooth-edged from being carried for so long. "My grandmother gave me this," he said. "She told me it was from a place in a story. She told me I'd know what to do with it when the time came." He looked at it. I never knew what she meant. He held it out over the fountain, looked at Marin. Marin said nothing. The boy was doing what the boy needed to do. Marin understood this with the certainty of someone who has spent 15 centuries learning to recognize the shape of a moment that matters. Elias dropped the stone into the fountain. The water caught it. There was no dramatic flash, no trembling of the earth, only a small sound, the sound of something small entering something large, and then a ripple moving outward in perfect circles. The ripple spread to the edges of the fountain and continued somehow beyond it, passing through the stone of the plaza and outward through the city in a wave that was not sound and not light, but something in between, something that had no name in the language of daylight, and Varenhal began, very slowly, to stir. It was not sudden. It was like watching dawn come, gradual, and then, at some precise moment, unmistakable. A woman in a doorway lifted her head. 2 children on a bench opened their eyes and blinked slowly, like people surfacing from the most complete rest they had ever known. An old man in the library turned a page and continued reading, picking up exactly where he had left off. Voices began, quiet at first, confused, then growing warmer as people found each other and the confusion softened into something else, into the slow, returning wonder of being back. Marin sat very still through all of it. He felt something he had not felt in a long time, something that moved through him the way light moves through deep water, reaching every part of him. He stayed still and let it arrive. Elias sat beside him and watched the kingdom come alive. Later, when the light had begun to soften toward evening and the streets of Varenhal were full of voices and the smell of fires being lit and bread being put in ovens, as though no time had passed at all, Elias sat again at the fountain with the old wolf. The stone was gone. The water ran clear and steady. "What will you do now?" Elias asked. Marin thought about this for a while. "Sleep, I suppose," he said finally. "I have not slept in a very long time." Elias looked at him. "Is that what you want?" The wolf was quiet for a moment. "It is what I am ready for," he said. "There is a difference." They sat together as the stars appeared, one by one, and the golden light of Varenhal deepened into evening. Somewhere nearby, children were running on the cobblestones. The sound was exactly as Marin remembered it, exactly as it had been 15 centuries ago, and 100 years before that, and 100 before that. Some sounds are older than the people who make them. He felt the boy's small hand settle on the fur of his neck, gentle and certain, and he closed his eyes. After 1,509 years, Marin, the great silver wolf of Varenhal, went to sleep, and the kingdom, restored and breathing and alive, held him gently in its warmth. And outside, beyond the silver birch forest, the stars continued their long, slow work, indifferent to time, faithful as ever, turning and turning above a world full of secrets that sleep until they are ready to be known. Close your eyes now. You have wandered far enough for one night. Whatever you are waiting for, whatever stone you carry in your pocket, it will find its moment. Rest the way old things rest, deeply, quietly, certain that the morning will come. It always does.